CEO humiliated the single dad, then saw herself as a little girl in his old photo. The room fell silent the moment billionaire CEO Vera Calloway pointed toward the door and told the single father he had no place among people like her. But neither of them knew that the faded photograph tucked inside his worn wallet would soon force Vera to question everything she believed about herself, her childhood, and the man standing humbly in front of her. The afternoon sun poured through the tall windows of Callaway Meridian Group, turning the polished marble floor into a sheet of gold. Executives in tailored suits moved through the headquarters with hurried confidence, speaking quietly about quarterly results and an upcoming charity foundation launch. Among them stood a man who looked completely out of place. His name was Tavian Brooks, a 38-year-old single father who worked as a facilities technician in the building. He wore a neatly pressed navy uniform, inexpensive shoes, and a silver watch with a cracked face. Nothing about him suggested wealth, influence, or importance. Yet Tavian carried himself with a quiet dignity that had survived years of hardship. His 9-year-old daughter, Zuri, was the center of his world. Since her mother had passed away years earlier, Tavian had worked every extra shift he could find to give his daughter a stable childhood. He never complained about the long hours. He simply believed that if he kept moving forward, someday Zuri would have opportunities he had never been given. That afternoon, Tavian had been called to the executive conference room because a problem had occurred during preparations for the company's annual foundation event. A framed display containing photographs from the company's earliest charity projects had fallen from the wall, damaging several important images. Tavian had repaired the display and carefully restored the photographs that could be saved. One old photograph, however, had caught his attention. It showed a small group of children standing outside a community center nearly 3 decades earlier. Tavian recognized the place immediately. It was the Bright Horizons Children's Home, where he had spent part of his childhood. He had quietly mentioned the photograph to an assistant, who passed the information to Vera. Within minutes, Tavian was standing before the CEO herself. Vera was known throughout the business world for her brilliance and discipline. At 41, she had built a technology company that employed thousands of people. Her reputation was almost intimidating. She expected precision, efficiency, and professionalism from everyone around her. Unfortunately, she had developed a habit of judging people by what they appeared to have accomplished rather than by what they had survived. Vera looked at Tavian's uniform and then at the photograph in his hand. She asked why he had been touching the display. Tavian calmly explained that he had repaired it and recognized the children's home in the picture. He added that one of the children might have been someone he knew. Vera's expression hardened. She had been under enormous pressure all week, and the charity event was supposed to impress several major investors. She told Tavian that the meeting was not the place for personal stories. When he tried to explain that the photograph could be important, she interrupted him and told him that employees like him were hired to fix things, not interfere in executive matters. The word struck Tavian harder than she realized. He lowered his eyes for a moment, then respectfully placed the photograph on the table. He said he understood and began to leave. But before he reached the door, Vera noticed something strange. The back of the photograph had a handwritten date and a few faded words. Tavian had written his name on it years ago, when he was a child, because the photograph had been taken during a special day at the children's home. Vera picked it up. Something about the handwriting made her pause. She turned the photograph over and saw a small note written by one of the home's volunteers. The note mentioned a little girl who had arrived at Bright Horizons after being separated from her family. Her name was listed only as Vera. Vera froze. The conference room suddenly felt smaller. She looked at the photograph again. Among the children stood a little girl with dark braids, a yellow sweater, and a small silver star pinned to her collar. The girl's face was partially turned toward the camera, but there was something unmistakable about her eyes. Vera knew those eyes. For nearly 3 decades, she had tried to forget them. She slowly looked at Tavian and asked where he had gotten the photograph. Tavian explained that it had been given to him by an elderly volunteer named Miss Amara, who had cared for the children when he was young. He had kept it because it was one of the few photographs he had from that period of his life. He had never known what happened to the little girl standing beside him. Vera's hands began to tremble. She asked Tavian what he remembered about that day. He said he remembered a frightened little girl who rarely spoke. She had arrived at the home carrying a small cloth bag. She cried whenever someone mentioned family. Tavian had been only 11, but he remembered sitting beside her outside beneath an old mango tree. He had given her half of his bread and promised that she would not have to be alone. Vera stared at him. She remembered the mango tree. She remembered the bread. She remembered the boy who had sat beside her when she thought nobody cared whether she lived or disappeared. But she remembered him only as Tavian. She had spent years believing that the boy from her childhood was someone she had lost forever. Tavian, however, had no idea that the frightened little girl from his memories had become the woman standing before him. Vera's carefully constructed world began to crack. She remembered arriving at Bright Horizons after being separated from her family during a chaotic relocation. She remembered the fear, the unfamiliar faces, and the loneliness. Most of all, she remembered a boy who had treated her like she mattered. He had shared his food with her, helped her carry her tiny bag, and once told her that being forgotten did not mean she was worthless. Those words had stayed with her. Years later, Vera had been adopted by a wealthy couple who gave her a new life. She received an excellent education, entered the corporate world, and eventually built her own company. But she had buried her childhood so deeply that she rarely spoke about it. She convinced herself that success meant leaving the past behind. Now the past was standing in front of her wearing a maintenance uniform. Tavian watched her silently as tears formed in her eyes. He still did not understand. Vera asked whether he remembered the silver star on the little girl's sweater. Tavian nodded. He remembered giving it to her. He had found it near the playground and pinned it to her collar because she was crying. He said he had wanted her to have something that reminded her she was special. Zuri then asked whether her father had helped her. Vera smiled and said he had. Zuri looked at Tavian with pride and said that her father helped everyone. Those simple words moved Vera deeply. She realized that Tavian had not become kind because life had been kind to him. He had become kind despite everything life had taken away. That was the lesson she had needed all her life. Months later, the Bright Horizons Foundation opened a new learning center in the same community where the children's home had once stood. The old mango tree was still there. Beneath it, Vera and Tavian placed a small plaque honoring the children who had passed through the home and the people who had helped them find hope. Vera brought the old photograph. She had it carefully restored and placed inside a glass frame. She refused to put her name above Tavian's. Instead, she asked that the plaque simply read that one act of kindness between two children had survived decades and returned to change thousands of lives. Tavian stood beside her as Zuri watched children enter the new center. Vera told him that she had spent much of her adult life believing success meant becoming powerful enough that nobody could ever hurt her again. Now she understood that real strength was different. Real strength meant having enough courage to admit when you were wrong. Tavian smiled and said that perhaps the little girl beneath the mango tree had always known that. Vera looked toward the photograph. For the first time, she did not see an embarrassing chapter of her past. She saw the beginning of her life. She saw the frightened little girl she had once been. She saw the boy who had shared his bread with her. And she finally understood that kindness is rarely small when it reaches someone at the moment they need it most. Special request: if this story touched your heart, comment below with, "Kindness always finds its way back." If this story inspired you or reminded you of the power of kindness, please like, share, and subscribe to Heartwarming Tales so more people can discover stories that bring hope and encouragement. Years later, Vera would still keep that old photograph on her desk. Whenever business became overwhelming or success tempted her to judge someone too quickly, she would look at the little girl in the yellow sweater and remember the boy who had given her half his bread without asking for anything in return. Tavian continued raising Zuri with the same quiet love that had carried him through difficult years, and the foundation continued helping children who needed someone to believe in them. Their story became a reminder that people are never defined by their clothes, their jobs, their wealth, or the mistakes they make. Sometimes the person we overlook is the very person who once helped us become who we are. And sometimes, the kindness we thought was forgotten has simply been waiting for the right moment to come back home, ... Vera covered her mouth. That was the moment she knew. The boy who had comforted her had never disappeared. He had simply grown into a man she had humiliated because she had judged him by his uniform. Vera remembered the harsh words she had spoken only minutes earlier. She remembered the way Tavian had lowered his eyes. She remembered how easily she had assumed that his position made him less worthy of respect. For the first time in years, Vera felt ashamed. She told Tavian who she was. Tavian stared at her in disbelief. He looked at the photograph again and then back at her. The resemblance between the little girl and the powerful CEO was impossible to ignore. He remembered her now, the frightened child who had clung to the sleeve of his old sweater and whispered that she wanted someone to remember her. He had remembered. All these years, he had remembered. Vera apologized, but Tavian did not immediately respond. He was not angry. Instead, he told her that people sometimes hurt others when they are carrying pain they have never faced. He said he understood because he had spent years learning how to forgive people who judged him for being poor, for being a single father, and for working a job they considered insignificant. That answer broke something open inside Vera. She asked why he had never tried to find her. Tavian smiled sadly and explained that he had searched when he was younger, but the records from Bright Horizons were incomplete. Eventually, life became about raising Zuri and surviving. He had stopped searching because he assumed the little girl had found a better life somewhere. Vera quietly told him that she had. But she added that she had forgotten the person who helped her believe she deserved one. Tavian shook his head and told her that she had not forgotten completely. The woman she became was proof that the frightened little girl had survived. The conversation might have ended there, but Vera noticed the cracked silver watch on Tavian's wrist. She asked about it. Tavian explained that it had belonged to his father. It was the only valuable thing his father had left behind. Although it barely worked, Tavian kept repairing it because it reminded him that time could break things without making them worthless. Vera smiled through her tears. She told him that perhaps people were the same. That afternoon, something changed inside the company. Vera walked out of the conference room and publicly apologized to Tavian in front of the executives and staff members who had witnessed her earlier humiliation. She did not hide behind her position or offer excuses. She admitted that she had judged a good man by his uniform and forgotten the kindness he had shown her when they were children. Tavian accepted the apology. But Vera did something more important than saying sorry. She asked Tavian to help her redesign the Foundation's community program. Instead of simply donating money to organizations, she wanted the company to support children who had been separated from their families, giving them education, mentorship, and long-term opportunities. Tavian agreed on one condition. He wanted the program to treat every child with dignity, regardless of their background. Vera promised that it would. Over the following weeks, Tavian became involved in the Foundation project. He brought practical ideas from his own experiences, while Vera contributed resources and connections. Their partnership surprised everyone. She was a powerful executive who knew how to build companies. He was a hardworking father who understood what it meant to struggle quietly. Together, they created something neither could have built alone. The most important moment came when Tavian brought Zuri to the Foundation's first community event. Vera knelt beside the little girl and introduced herself. Zuri looked at the old photograph in Vera's hands and asked whether she was the little girl in the picture. Vera nodded.